Okay, great. I'm good to go. Well, hello everybody. It's a pleasure to be here and have the opportunity to speak with you all about Synota. My name is Austin Mitchell, and I am the CEO of Synota. And one thing that is interesting about me is I'm actually relatively new to Bitcoin. I've been in the energy industry my entire life, and that sort of gives me, I think, a unique experience to talk about the problem today that Bitcoin and the Lightning Network can solve. So having been in the energy industry my entire life, one of the things that I can do is as I consume energy in my house, I can think about all of the companies that touch the energy en route to getting to where I live. And so I understand sort of where it is being produced, who are the transmission companies, who are the utilities that delivers it to me. And so consuming energy in my house, now here's my actual utility bill from this last month. And while I can think about how efficiently energy moves towards me, I can then start to think about, well, what is the financial part of the transaction to now move energy or move the dollars when I pay my bill back up the value chain to the people who had a role in actually delivering the energy. And so one of the things to kind of point out here is that after I've consumed the energy, so what's reflected here is that, hey, there's a billing period that ended on October 24th, but I'm paying the bill on November 16th. So what that implies is that there was actually a period of time, the energy that I consumed in September, that is delayed by over a month in terms of when I consumed it versus when I pay. And when you think about the fact that the billing process itself is outsourced, the payment processing today is outsourced, there's a lot of financial intermediaries involved in the transaction that create inefficiency, on top of the fact that I'm paying for something after the fact that I've already consumed it. And so when we kind of zoom out from my house, my utility bill, and think about this problem broadly, the biggest thing that we're talking about is really a disconnect that exists between the physical side of energy and the financial side. That disconnect is generally more than 30 days. It can be upwards of 60 to 90 days before people who are in the value chain are actually being paid. And so what is this? What are the reasons for it? You have manual processes and outdated IT systems. You have these daisy chain payments where you pay your utility, who then pays the transmission company, who then pays the producer. And sort of the two things that result from that are cash lag. So energy companies face a lot of cash issues. So they're spending money to bring energy to you, but not getting energy or not getting your payments for, again, a couple of months. And then you have bad debt. So bad debt being basically people just ultimately not paying for the energy that has been delivered to them. So this is what sort of sticks out as a big problem within the energy industry, something that I have firsthand knowledge of dealing with in the roles that I've had. But there's even an additional layer where this goes in terms of when you think about how this is actually stifling innovation and preventing us from moving forward in an energy transition. And so what's the solution going to be? So what we're representing here is essentially a programmatic layer on the Lightning Network that links all of the physical nodes of energy, so the points of production, consumption, the substations, everything that exists in that energy value chain, having its own Lightning node in the network. And what our software does is it creates a programmatic link between the physical energy system and the financial, and the Lightning Network on the financial side. And so when I say a programmatic link, it's really just about your energy meter being able to talk with your Lightning node. And so they're able to basically understand that, hey, when energy moves in one direction, money needs to move in the other direction. And so what's represented here is sort of a visual of here's a simplified view of the energy system, and on top of it is our programmatic layer. Importantly, kind of showing that, hey, there can be other, bringing the entire energy system to the Lightning Network is going to be done by, more companies than just ours. So thinking about how do we bring the whole system, energy economy to it, we want to really think in a very open way. But in terms of some of the benefits of the solution, we're talking about instant low-cost payments, granular programmability, automated enforcement, and secure API integrations. One of the things that's sort of subtle on this page is that we're sort of decentralizing not only the payments, and making those peer-to-peer between parties, but we're also decentralizing the data processing. We're decentralizing all of the things that your energy companies do or outsource today. So your data with your meter is going to stick with you with you and sort of on your node. And that will sort of unlock additional efficiencies that will enable the energy transition to occur. So what I wanted to do is just provide kind of a simple visual to say, hey, this is where we began with what our minimum viable product was earlier this year. And what we were doing is we were the first to really settle a power purchase agreement on the Lightning Network. And the setup here is basically that we had a consumer being a Bitcoin miner, and then the energy supplier, in this case, being represented over there. They each had their own node in the Lightning Network with then our programmatic, our software installed. So as we move forward in this transaction, both parties agreed to, here are the terms of the power purchase agreement, so 6 cents per kilowatt, and they agreed that they would settle that transaction every 15 minutes. What's important in how our software works is that the movement of energy is actually the trigger. It's what initiates the payment. So it provides that source of truth. So every 15 minutes, our software will ping the meter, figure out how much energy moved, and then the appropriate payment will be made. All of that is decentralized, and all of that is very fast. So we're able to do this whole transaction in about 10 seconds. Importantly, we're leveraging a third-party integration on the energy supplier side to enable USD payments, or to enable the Bitcoin to then be off-ramped into USD for the energy supplier. Because in our experience, energy suppliers today are not keen on receiving Bitcoin quite yet. And so what I wanted to do is dive in next into kind of the expansion of that very simple two-counterparty use case and talk about sort of where have we evolved to, and what are the first sort of implementations of our software going to look like. And so in this case, what I'm representing is a typical Bitcoin mining hosting model. And the reason we're talking about Bitcoin mining is because we think that they're the ideal industry to really initiate this innovation. They already, their revenue comes in Bitcoin, so here's an opportunity for them to pay their energy bills in Bitcoin, where then their counterparties can either receive in Bitcoin or receive in USD. So with what's represented here is you have Bitcoin, the Bitcoin miner, you have their node, then nodes for each of the hosting provider, the energy supplier, and the energy broker down there, and so every whatever the cadence is chosen by the parties, the payment's going to automatically be routed through the Lightning Network, and so you can think about if you are a hosting provider, you can be paid every hour for the energy that the miners using your site are using, or daily or weekly. So it's completely flexible in terms of its implementation. So let me pause here. Are there any questions on sort of what's on the page? Because I think it's important to talk about how Bitcoin miners can, what a typical setup would be there. Yeah.
Do the miners only get paid? I'm sorry, I'll start from the beginning. The miners are participating in this, and I forget the name, if it's paper share plus, whatever they are, where they get paid in real time, or the ones where they are subject to luck, or does it not matter?
Yeah, so typically Bitcoin miners are especially ones of scale, are getting daily payouts. And so what we're talking about in this setup would be having the miner do a payout directly from the pool onto the platform, and then instantly being deposited into the energy supplier, the broker's bank accounts.
I guess what I'm asking is, do miners who use one of those particular, in general, participate in this? Or I guess it doesn't matter which payout they use, but do you see miners use a particular one who participate in this?
Oh, yeah, so, sorry, I lost the feed. So the short answer is, what we're wanting to accomplish here is actually a very frictionless payment flow. And so in that, what we would do is we would work towards integration with the mining pools themselves. And so the opportunity exists to actually change how much is being paid out from the pools based on what the cost for the electricity is going to be. So that would be the ideal scenario, where it would basically be frictionless, hands-off, automated process. So one of the other things that's important to mention, so why are we talking about Bitcoin miners initiating this innovation? So 900 Bitcoin are mined every day. So as we think about bringing Bitcoin miners onto the Lightning Network, that's a huge opportunity to bring liquidity there. So what's good for Bitcoin miners is also going to be good for the broader ecosystem. B, in this equation, they're no longer having to liquidate their Bitcoin themselves. So it's not a manual process where they're having to do it. It's now going to be done for them. And then C, it's the opportunity to now sort of change the narrative when they do energy contracts. So think about today with some of the issues with miner insolvency, not being able to pay their bills, here's an opportunity to restructure those contracts and actually pay more frequently. So pay every hour, pay every day. But what you're doing is you're reducing that credit exposure. So the idea is that you can start to move forward with a different way of transacting that actually is good for the energy supplier because their risk is being reduced, but also good for the Bitcoin miner because it's a completely frictionless implementation of a transaction. So what's really neat in how we're stepping forward is our very first, this kind of represents sort of our one of our first implementations of the software. And we're not even talking to the energy supplier today. We're working just with the broker and the hosting provider. And so it sort of speaks to the flexibility of this where we're doing these split payouts because the broker in this case is the last one to usually get paid in that daisy chain. And so they want to move up to the front of the line and get paid right when the energy is being consumed, just like the hosting provider. And so when you think about a network effect that can materialize from this, it's a real opportunity for, in this case, the energy suppliers to see how two counterparties in this transaction are getting paid every hour. They have good cash flow, they have lower risk profile. And so you can now create that opportunity to say, hey, not only do you have the opportunity to get Bitcoin, you can get paid in USD, but do you see how other people in this transaction are being paid? So we think it can start to create that network effect within the Bitcoin mining industry or within the energy space. So one of the things that we talked about earlier is just sort of how this is holding back the energy transition. And key to that really is issues of energy access and equity. And one of the things that we're working on is with a couple partners in Africa, is we're demonstrating that with Bitcoin and the Lightning Network, we can do transactions that cross borders. So with our partners there, we're basically the same sort of transaction mechanism that we talked about before, but in this case, it's a Bitcoin miner that we are having hosted in Africa. That Bitcoin miner is consuming energy in Africa. We're getting the mining rewards from that Bitcoin miner, but we're able to pay that energy bill from the United States. So we can pay daily back to the grid for the energy. Now, what's happening there, though, is that it's the case that within these mini grids in Africa, so here's the opportunity, that when they're brand new mini grids, they really have a lot of excess power. If you're thinking about it in remote Africa, there's not going to be a lot of organic load on the system. Here's an opportunity to use Bitcoin mining to actually bring some of that, to be that load initially, to help create incremental revenue to the grid without creating additional cost. And so why we're doing this is not because we intend to be Bitcoin miners. We're doing this to demonstrate that here's now a cross-border energy investment. One of the biggest issues in energy today is that it's difficult to invest across borders. It's difficult to put money into projects that are not within your home country. So here's an opportunity that we're paying for energy there, but you can think of it in the inverse. If you're an investor in the United States and you wanted to put money into energy infrastructure abroad, here's a way for you now to recoup, to have money come back to you to repatriate the funds for your investment. So it's a really big opportunity to enhance energy access, to really open up the global energy economy. And so then I wanted to finish with some key takeaways. So as a company, we exist to create energy abundance. And so what I mean by that is that this innovation that we're talking about is really about integrating the physical and the financial side together. And when you do that, what you've done is you've now put supply and demand, right next to each other. You've removed all of the friction between them. And why that's transformative is because now we're kind of able to move into a future where we're able to start to get much more granular in terms of how we think about energy markets. We're able to be much more transparent or drive transparency into energy markets. So it's really two parts. It's being close together, having those quick payments, but then the decentralization of the processing is going to allow us to solve issues like equity that exist in the United States. So one of the examples that I like to talk about is that in Chicago there was a study done on solar panels, and there was incentives provided at the state level to install solar panels on rooftops. And of course, most of those solar panels were being adopted by folks in wealthy neighborhoods. And what the study showed is that as these solar panels are being deployed, exclusively in certain zip codes, it was actually creating more stress on the grid. That increased stress on the grid was resulting in basically higher costs that then were being socialized to everybody. So with software like this, by decentralizing the processing, by getting more transparency and granularity into the payments and the pricing, what we're able to do now is start to really provide a clear market signal for where we should be, deploying energy resources. It is the case that most of us, that live in the United States, we're basically paying the same price of energy for somebody that could be living a couple hundred miles away, even though we all know that energy is different price or has a different cost in terms of, geographically as well as during different hours of the day. The other key point when we're talking about decentralizing the energy system, the energy system itself is already undergoing this process of decentralization. So we've entered a place where, pardon me. So as we're seeing, more resources being brought onto the grid from different areas, you're seeing more rooftop solar. The grid is becoming more decentralized. Here's the opportunity now you need to also decentralize the financial side of things to match up with that. Also, as the point I've made before, instant settlement really is going to enable market transparency and granularity. This is, again, it's bringing supply and demand much closer together so they can sort of be a natural tug and, push and pull on each other. Highlighted the opportunity to solve global challenges of energy equity and access. So it is both, here in the United States, but also around the world. There's still 1 billion people without access to electricity. And I also just want to mention lastly that really none of this is possible without the Bitcoin community. And I think as we move forward as a company, that's going to be one of the big things for us is, tapping into the community. We're leveraging open source software today. We have some of our software is already open source today, and we'll continue to push the envelope on that. So I know I was trying to help them catch up on time, and I actually went through that way quicker than I expected. So I welcome any questions from folks. Yeah, George.
Really good thing for the Lightning Network, very positive. But, I mean, if this scales or at scale, I mean, is this possible? Is there enough throughput now, or is there going to, is this something that has to be developed to be able to handle this? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a great question, George. So what I would say is that, that's part of what we sort of are, part of the torch that we're willing to carry as a company is we're talking about bringing a ton of additional liquidity to the Lightning Network. And so it's an opportunity to move the Lightning Network forward and faster, quicker. And so we expect that we're going to have to break things. We're going to have to come up with sort of novel ways of solving some problems. But that's really what we see as the opportunity here. And of course, building things in a way to be really robust and resilient because, we're not paying for podcasts, we're not, paying for pupusas, we're paying for energy. And so we need to make sure that the payment reliability is near 100%. And because it is a critical thing. So we're sort of going to be measuring our success by how well we can do those things.
Just as a follow-up to that, does that mean, how are you going to explain this concept then to your, to the providers that are going to be using the network system, since they're probably legacy institutions and they're not exposed? They probably have no idea what Lightning is, let alone
Yeah. Yeah, that's another great question, George. So what I would say is, back to that example from the Bitcoin mining space. So clearly in the case of the Bitcoin miner themselves and the hosting provider, they're very comfortable with Bitcoin. They understand what it is that we're doing. And so what we're trying to do is really create a network effect around basically energy payments over Lightning. And so when we talk to energy suppliers today, the problem that we're solving, the cash lag, the bad debt, the credit risk, that's something universally appreciated in what energy companies want to see solved. Where there's going to be, I think, a gap in terms of adoption is they're not willing to touch Bitcoin today. So what we have to do is really find the areas in the market where we can make progress, and then other parts of the value chain are going to have an opportunity to see the transaction in ways that are beneficial to them. So in the example of the Bitcoin mining case, if I'm sitting there and I'm seeing the other parties to the transaction are getting paid every hour, I'm going to wonder, well, why don't I do that too? They're receiving cash consistently every hour. They no longer have to worry about doing reconciliation because of instant payments. Reconciliation as an entire process goes away. So that's kind of how we're thinking about this, is that by proving the benefits where they make sense, we'll be able to open open hearts and minds into, okay, this is something that I'd like to buy into as well. Because really, we're not asking energy suppliers to do anything different except being paid more frequently. And then as time moves forward, they'll recognize that, well, we also don't need to do all those accounting practices anymore. So I think it's going to sort of peel back layer by layer, but that's why we're really, driving forward with Bitcoin miners. And given, the recent situation, it really makes sense for them to think about using their Bitcoin to pay their energy bills. Yeah, Ryan.
Just in terms of that $10 of efficiency, or the 10% efficiency, where do you think that ends up being well? Obviously, that's a big part of the pitch, being saving money on the system. Is the majority of that, well, you have multiple parties in this operation. You have multiple parties in this operation. That efficiencies that you gain from using your software, where does that ultimately flow? Is it to the miner? Is it to the supplier of energy? What is the mix?
Yeah, so one of the interesting things is it's going to actually kind of depend on the situation that you're in. But what a lot of people don't understand is that in the U.S. we have, most people get their energy from regulated utilities. And regulated utilities have two ways that they spend their money. It's O&M or capital. And they only make a return on the capital part of how they spend money. So everything that I'm talking about here is actually reducing their O&M. So they can, basically their whole view of this is going to be, I'm able to bring savings which will allow me in the short term to benefit, but then in the long term, the regulated utility model then moves savings back down to the consumer. So it's going to, I think, manifest itself in different ways, but in a traditional utility standpoint here in the United States, that's going to be how it goes, is that utilities will get sort of a short-term shot in the arm, but then long-term, that will flow back to the consumer. Any other questions? Yeah, please.
Yeah. Does your software work with any meter, or does it only work with software?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the things that's really interesting, and kind of breezed over it earlier, but when you think about the energy system today and how it's transpired, so most people and businesses today are connected to digital meters, smart meters. And in fact, there's 125 million deployed in the United States, but only 3% of them are being used, beyond just reading your meter. And so there's a huge opportunity being missed there. And so that's really why we're doing things the way that we are. So we're able to integrate with any sort of smart meter, any digital meter. That's the idea, is to really build a platform that can integrate. So from the Bitcoin mining space, you think about companies like Foreman. When it comes to the BTC to USD conversion on the back end, there's a number of companies doing that type of stuff. So we really want to be integrated broadly, both on the physical hardware side, but also in the other services that exist within this ecosystem or could add value to the equation. Any other questions? Well, thank you all for the opportunity to speak. I really appreciate it.